With birds, you're never lonely. Okay. So a couple of things we spoke about already, which I'll just add for this video. So first of all, birds, often connotations of freedom and nature, and loneliness. Now I mentioned that you can be lonely with people around you. So being lonely is about connection, right? Do you have links to other people? Do you feel like you have a place, or do you feel like you are isolated and separate from everybody else? I can't hear the barrister over the coffee machine. So we'll start this off, right? So we're starting off here. We are in the city, we're assuming. A barrister is somebody that makes coffee. Somebody that makes coffee, okay, over the coffee machine. So again, we've got a sense straight away of noise, okay, but kind of a little bit of a kind of urban environment where people are going to coffee shops, okay. He says here, I can't hear. So again, there's a sense that we know that he is deaf and that we know that he struggles with sound. But notice there's here already about a lack of connection. So he can't hear the barrister talking over the coffee machine. So straight away we've got a sense that there is a disconnect. There's a disconnect between him and the people that he's interacting with. This man is making coffee for him. He does not know him. So again, even calling him the barista, is that he's a stranger, right? Because this is a guy with a name and a job and a life, but to Raymond, he's just the barrister, right? Spoons slam, steam rises. I catch the eye of a man sitting in the corner. So notice here, we have enjambment. So even though these stanzas look like little couplets, they don't really work, right? Happens here again as well. So why do it? Why do it? Well, partly it might be to do again with a disconnect. So the way that he and the man are separate, that they're not linked together, they're kind of split and fragmented. Okay. The poem is weird. It's kind of all split up and broken when it shouldn't be, which you have to assume is a reason. The word slam is loud. Steam, again, you can imagine the sound of the steam. Steam also has a kind of a mist to it. So there's lots of things about how people are separated. They can't see each other, they can't hear each other. There is all this like noise, and yet no one's able to communicate. I catch the eye of a man sitting in the corner. Okay, again, in the corner. So he is alone. To catch the eye means that they see each other. But again, it's a weird setting, right? There's an idea that these people are all in the same coffee shop, and yet no one's talking to each other, right? No one talks to each other. They just do their own separate things. Reading alone. About trees. Okay, which incidentally is all I can think about. So there's an idea here. Now we've got a bit of connection. So both of them are thinking about trees. Okay, why trees? Well, trees are old, they're natural. There's something about trees that's kind of wholesome, I guess. It's all I can think about since returning. Okay, so here's your first line you can draw in the poem. Okay, so this first bit here is about the city, and then of course we have a volta. So remember, a volta is the Italian word for time. It is a shift in the setting or the feeling or the location. So returning. Okay, so to again come back. Now again, notice where the volta comes, right? The volta comes in the middle of a stanza. So again, we've got another example of things being split. Again, that's a very unusual thing to do. Normally, the volta would come between the stanzas, not in the middle of the stanza. So it shows the way that everything is sort of linked together, but also everything is kind of divided apart. Last week, I sat alone. Again, the second time that word is used. Last week, I sat alone on a stump. Right? Now, a stump is a cut down tree. Last week I sat alone on a stump deep in Zealandia forest. So we're in New Zealand, okay? But the depth, if you look at the word deep here, there's a sense here that he's right in the wild. So he's gone right into the forest, right, to be kind of alone or like completely immersed. I'll use this word again, to be immersed in nature. With sun-syruped kari trees, okay? So a kari tree is a native tree of New Zealand. Sun-syruped is a really nice bit of alliteration here. So think of syrup as being something that's quite sweet. So the tree's kind of sticky, like the sun has like made the sap come out of it and go kind of sticky. But there's a sense here that like he's kind of feeling his way around. And because he's deaf, his other senses take over. So he's feeling the trees, okay? And brazen tui birds. So again, tui birds with white tufts and yellow and black beaks. Notice the colours here, right? White, yellow, black. So these are kind of vibrant birds. So he's surrounded with like life. Okay, I'm going to put here life. The trees feel real, the birds feel real. Notice the naming. So these things have names. Kari, Tui. Compare that with the barrister here who has no name. Okay, which I think is kind of important. They landed by my feet. Okay, they landed by my feet, blaring so loudly I had to turn off my hearing aids. So they're like, caw, right? So there's a lot of noise, but he doesn't mind this noise. This is natural noise, right? It's not the noise of steam, it's the noise of nature. Landed by my feet shows that they are unafraid of him. So even the birds, he has more connection with the birds than he does with the people. But again, I have to emphasize this, right? Notice this. So you've got the names of the birds and the trees. They're coming up to him. They're making loud noises. Compared to this earlier setting where no one's talking to him, and this nameless barista is making his coffee with no thought or feeling attached. I turn off my hearing aids. Okay. So again, there's an idea here of being overwhelmed by noise. And of course, because he has hearing aids, because he's deaf, he can just turn them off. He can choose. I find it interesting, right? So he can choose whether to hear. So in a way, what he's done is he's turned his disability into a power, right? This is a power, isn't it? So whereas everyone else is stuck with noise, he can just turn it on and off whenever he chooses to. When all sound disappeared, I was tuned into a silence that was not absence. So he says the silence has meaning and feeling to it. He says I could be silent, I could look around, I could feel the connection. I'll put here, feel the connection of this world. As I switched sound on again, silence collapsed. Silence collapsed. So again, we have a sense of like sound returns. So notice that he can sit in the middle of a forest on his own with no noise and feel a connection because he's in nature, whereas up here he can be surrounded by people and noise and feel completely alone. Right, second bit. The forest spat, interesting word, the metaphor. The forest spat all the birds back. I was jealous. Interesting. Notice this little break here. So this is a very short line, right? So what's he jealous of? It's hard to say, right? So why jealous? It could be because of nature that he doesn't normally get. It could be a sense of connection, which is kind of the key theme of this poem, as you might have noticed. The earthy kari trees, their endless brown and green trunks of sturdiness. So he's jealous of the trees, right? The trees get this sort of strength, right? Endless sturdiness. So the trees are strong and old and he envies them, maybe because they're more free than he is. I don't know. I wondered what the trees would say about us. So the sense here that the trees have wisdom. A lot of trees, these trees in this forest will have been there for thousands of years, maybe thousands of years. Their lifespans way outweigh our own, and yet we cut them down and write books about them. So there's a sense here about kind of wisdom. I'm going to put it about a bit of spirituality. What books would they write if they had cut us down? So again, books are about wisdom. So essentially about sort of like humans, I guess humans versus nature. That humans have power over nature, even though nature is something older and wiser and better than us. When we are all dead and gone, nature will remain, and we will go. Sense here about sort of like, I'm going to put eternal nature. Nature is forever. Later, so a bit of a time shift here. Later, stumbling from the forest. So stumbling is interesting. Says he's been in maybe a bit of a trance. Stumbling from the forest. I listened to a young Maori woman. Okay, we've got more listening to a young Maori woman. Now, this is an interesting thing here, because to be a Maori is to be kind of an ancient race, and yet she is young. So she's both a young person, but also represents the history of the whole place. He listens to her. She could tell which bird chirped, a skill she learned from her grandfather. Okay. Now what we've got a lot of here is connection again. So connections with what? Well, she could tell which bird chirped. She can almost like read the birds. So she can speak. I'm going to put she can speak to / hear the birds, and she learned it from her grandfather. So again, there's a sense here, a skill she learned from her grandfather. So we've got a sense of family, but also this sense of like, again, connection with something, right? Your family's lived here a long, long time. Who said, with birds you're never lonely. Now notice here, we've got italics. So this is the grandfather's voice. It is also the title of the poem. So when we now think a little bit more about what the poem is actually about. The grandfather says, with birds you are never lonely. So this is again about kind of nature and being spiritual and feeling connected to the world if you're with the birds, right? So it doesn't mean literally the birds, it means to be in nature. Is the idea here, right? Again, another little line here. So this is another one of our little voltas. In that moment, I felt sorry for any grey tree in London. So notice the greyness. Now we had this in the other poems as well, that greyness is about being lifeless. The grey tree in London. So he names the city from earlier on. For the family they don't have. For the gods they can't hold. Okay. Now this last line I think is we'll come back to this in a sec, because I think it's a little confusing. But essentially we've got here this idea that the trees are lonely, right? Because the trees have no birds, right? So the trees in London don't have birds. They don't have this sort of natural wildlife. The trees have been taken from their natural setting, put into London, where they probably look quite pretty in the park, but they don't have the tui birds. They don't have all the life. Now, this last line here, notice first of all, we call this a deviation, because there is a single line. All the other lines are couplets, this one is on its own. So it might symbolise how the trees are lonely, the trees are on their own, they're separated. But it says here, for the family they don't have, for the gods they can't hold. Okay? Now, if a tree can't hold anything, so that's a confusing image, right? But what a tree can hold in its branches is birds. And I think that when he talks about God, what he's talking about is birds. And this idea that sort of that God is in nature. We learned this word the other day. It's what we call pantheism. So if you want to be close to God, if you want to be close to spirituality, you have to be in nature. So it's kind of a romantic idea. Now, I wouldn't say that Raymond Antrobus is a romantic poet, like Wordsworth was, but he definitely has the same kind of idea. You think about Wordsworth's poem, he argues that people in cities are corrupted, they conform, and in nature you feel spiritual and you feel connected. And this is really a poem about the same kind of idea, but told over 200 years later. Okay? Now there's a theory that in a bird there is proof of God. Because the idea, it's what we call a teleological argument. So the idea is that a bird, and I have this here, right? So a bird is perfect, right? It's been perfect. No, it's what we call the idea of what we call divine creation. So when you look at a bird, you would say the only way that something so perfect, with the complete perfect structure and feathers that it can fly in the air, must have been made by a god, right? It must have been made by somebody, because it's too amazing. How could it have been made by nature over time? It must have been made by a god. But of course the idea is that they also represent freedom. So there's lots of linked ideas here about God and freedom and spirituality. But the basic point of this poem is that when we go to the city, we can become isolated, we can lose our connection, we can lose our spirituality. When we're in nature, we can regain those things. Okay? And again, you've got a few people here. You've got him, you've got the barrister up here who are lonely and disconnected. You've got the Maori woman here and her grandfather who are never lonely, surrounded by nature. So it's really kind of comparing the two ways that human beings can live. Living in cities versus living in the natural world.